Victor Shen was a name that echoed through boardrooms, whispered in headlines, and carried weight in places where power was traded in silence. He was the enigmatic CEO of Shentech, a multi-billion-dollar corporation known for developing advanced surveillance technology. His face rarely appeared in public. When it did, it was always behind tinted glass or on the covers of finance magazines. People knew his wealth, but not his world. What the world didn't know was that Victor had enemies, not the kind that shouted, but the kind that watched. The kind that waited. When Victor's car crashed, it wasn't long before the news reached his board. His assistant found it odd that his security detail hadn't been with him that night. The company's internal investigators moved quickly. Within hours, the wreckage had been cleared, the black box of the vehicle extracted, and the data analyzed. That's when the truth surfaced. Someone had tampered with the car. The brake lines were cleanly cut. This wasn't mechanical failure. It was attempted murder. Victor woke in a private hospital under armed guard. His side was stitched, his body bruised, but his mind was sharp. The doctor said he owed his life to a young woman who had saved him before the car caught fire. The paramedics had no name for her, just a brief description. Asian, mid-20s, delivery uniform. She vanished before anyone could speak to her. But Victor remembered her face. In a fog of pain and blood, he remembered her eyes steady, calm, focused, not afraid. Not even in that moment. He ordered his people to find her, sparing no expense. His security team pulled footage from city traffic cameras, identifying the moment her scooter raced away from the crash site. Using plate recognition and app data, they traced her delivery route. Within 48 hours, they had a name, Mei Lin. Her file was thin, no social media, no family contacts. A work address, a phone number that barely rang. She didn't exist. In the way most people did. Victor knew someone like that could vanish again easily. He had to move fast. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, May was returning from the grocery store when two black sedans parked outside her apartment. Men in dark suits stepped out, but they weren't police. They were quiet, formal, and respectful. They didn't threaten. They didn't ask. They simply told her Victor Shen wanted to thank her in person. Confused and wary, May hesitated. But a part of her wanted answers. Why had the crash felt off? Why did her instincts scream that the man she saved wasn't just another victim? She agreed to go with them. The car ride was silent. They drove past the city limits into the Green Hills, where Victor's private estate sat behind steel gates and motion sensors. The mansion was massive, yet cold. Glass walls, marble floors, everything spotless. But there were no family photos. No signs of warmth. Only security cameras and silence. Victor greeted her in a wheelchair, bandages still visible beneath his robe. He looked tired but sharp. He thanked her for saving his life and offered her a reward. May refused. She didn't want money. She just wanted to go home, but he asked her to stay. Just for a few days. He said whoever tried to kill him might not stop and that she could be a target for simply being involved. It sounded paranoid. But deep down, she believed him. That night, May was shown to a guest room with bulletproof windows and a lock she didn't control. She stood by the window staring at the dark forest that surrounded the estate. She had entered as a stranger. But the moment she crossed that threshold, her life was no longer her own. She was part of a story unfolding behind the illusion of wealth and gratitude. And the real danger had only just begun. Mei Lin stood in the center of the grand estate, surrounded by polished floors and echoing silence, unsure of why she was really there. Victor Shen's presence was imposing even from a wheelchair. His face was pale, marked by bruises and thin medical tape, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. He spoke with the calmness of a man used to power, thanking her for saving his life. He offered her gifts, money, a new apartment, even a car, but May declined each one. She didn't want anything. Her instincts were louder than ever, warning her that something wasn't right. Still, when Victor asked her to stay for a few days for her own safety, she reluctantly agreed. The staff led her to a guest room on the second floor. It was beautiful but impersonal, like a luxury hotel with no soul. The windows were tinted, the doors locked automatically behind her, and the only way to communicate was through a panel on the wall. She noticed the cameras. One above the bed, another in the corner of the ceiling. She turned her back to them as she unpacked the little she had brought. Her hands trembled slightly. May had always trusted her instincts, and right now they were screaming. She told herself it was just temporary. That once Victor recovered and whoever tried to kill him was caught, she could return to her old life. But deep down, she knew there would be no going back. The next morning, 2 men in black suits escorted her to the dining hall. Victor sat at the head of a long table, sipping tea. He spoke casually, like they were old friends. He told her about Shentech, its rise from a startup to a global empire, its breakthroughs in surveillance systems, its enemies in business and politics. May listened quietly, nodding when appropriate. It felt less like a conversation and more like an interview. After breakfast, Victor's assistant handed her a card granting her full access to the estate, except the West Wing. When she asked why, they simply said, security reasons. That was the first red flag. Over the next 2 days, May explored the mansion. She noticed things, strange things. The estate was filled with cutting-edge security, yet lacked warmth. Every hallway had motion sensors. Every room had cameras. The staff never made eye contact. They walked silently, like ghosts trained to disappear. When she wandered too close to the West Wing, a guard appeared within seconds and politely redirected her. On the third night, unable to sleep, May wandered into the garden. It was beautiful, quiet, and strangely empty. That's when she saw it, a blood-stained scarf hidden beneath a bush near the fence. She picked it up and froze. It didn't look old. It looked fresh. She didn't recognize it as belonging to Victor or anyone she had seen. She rushed back inside, pretending nothing had happened. The next morning, Victor introduced her to his lead security officer, who showed her footage of the crash. He explained that the brakes had been tampered with, and that the police suspected corporate sabotage. He warned that whoever did it might come after her too, since she was the only witness. That's why he said she had to remain under protection. May nodded, but inside she was unsettled. Everything felt too neat, too scripted. Later that evening, she passed by the estate's security room and saw something that chilled her. One of the screens displayed her own apartment building footage from weeks ago. Another showed her practicing kung fu at dawn in the alley behind her home. The camera angles were too close. They weren't from street cameras. They were hidden, personal. Victor hadn't just met her by chance. He had been watching her for weeks, maybe longer. And now she realized she hadn't saved a stranger. She had walked straight into a trap. May Lin knew something was deeply wrong. But the realization didn't come all at once. It settled like a cold fog in her chest, thickening with every hour she spent inside the mansion. The luxurious estate had begun to feel more like a prison than a place of safety. The security guards didn't act like bodyguards. They moved with military precision, said nothing, and carried weapons just a little too openly. Their eyes followed her not with concern, but with suspicion. She tried to act normal, as though she hadn't seen the surveillance footage of her own life. But her instincts were on high alert now. Every corner she turned, every room she entered, she scanned for exits and possible threats. The surveillance room haunted her thoughts. Victor had been watching her long before the car crash. The footage was too specific, too intimate. This wasn't about gratitude or safety. She was involved in something far bigger than she understood. Still, she played along. Each morning, Victor would summon her for breakfast. He spoke softly, always polite, always smiling. He asked her about her past, her training, her life. She answered carefully, never revealing too much. She began to suspect that these casual conversations were more like interrogations wrapped in warmth. Victor never said anything alarming, but there was something behind his words, a subtle weight, like he was always measuring her usefulness. She continued to explore the estate when she could. One evening, she wandered near the west wing, the one place she had been told was off limits. The hallway was darker, colder. She pressed her ear against one of the thick wooden doors and heard what sounded like typing quick, frantic keystrokes and low voices. Just as she leaned closer, a guard appeared out of nowhere, staring at her without expression. He didn't speak. He simply turned her around and guided her back to the main part of the house. Not a word exchanged, but the warning was clear. That night, she couldn't sleep. Her mind spun with questions. Why had Victor targeted her? Why stage a car crash? What did he want from someone like her? Unable to sit still, she returned to the garden. It was just past midnight. The air was still and heavy. She crouched near the bush where she had found the scarf days ago, searching the ground. That's when she found something else, a cracked phone, half buried in the dirt. Its screen was shattered, but the casing was elegant, expensive. She took it back to her room, locked the door, and used a screwdriver from a drawer to pry it open. The SIM card was still intact. She slipped the card into her own spare phone and scrolled through the contents. Most of it was corrupted, but one video remained. She played it with trembling fingers. The footage showed a man terrified, bound and gagged, being dragged through a hallway that looked just like the West Wing. He screamed, but his voice was muffled. The video cut out before anything else happened. May sat frozen. This wasn't just a security breach or corporate sabotage. Something darker was happening in this house. Suddenly, the lights in her room flickered. The camera in the corner of the ceiling clicked, adjusting its angle. May glanced at it, trying not to react. She knew they had seen the video. She had pushed too far. Before dawn, guards arrived at her door. This time they didn't knock. They entered, said nothing, and asked her to follow. May had no choice. She slipped the phone back under her mattress and walked out calmly, heart pounding. They led her to a different part of the estate. Not the dining room. Not the garden. The West Wing asterisk. The hallway of the West Wing was colder than the rest of the estate. Its silence was heavier, its lights dimmer. Mei Lin walked slowly, flanked by two guards who offered no words. Only the sound of synchronized footsteps echoing off the marble floor. Her eyes scanned every surface, every door they passed. There were no windows. No art, just polished walls. And faint lines where hidden panels might exist. The hallway ended at a heavy steel door. One of the guards swiped a card, entered a code, and the door hissed open. Inside was a sleek, sterile room filled with computers, screens, and humming servers. A man she hadn't seen before stood at the center, facing a large monitor that displayed rotating 3D models and lists of names. He didn't turn around when she entered. Instead, he gestured for the guards to leave. The door locked behind her. She didn't ask questions. She just watched. The man finally turned. He was younger than Victor, dressed in a lab coat. His face was pale, tired, and emotionless. He introduced himself as Dr. Yuan, head of Shentech's internal research division. He told her that she had been brought there to understand the truth, now that she had already seen too much. Then he pointed to one of the screens where May's own profile was displayed, alongside countless surveillance videos, biometric scans, and psychological reports. It was all about her. Her daily habits, sleep patterns, even how many times she blinked during stress. She was a subject, not a guest. Dr. Yuan explained that Victor had been developing an experimental behavioral algorithm that could identify individuals with extreme self-discipline, emotional control, and martial capabilities. These individuals, once identified, were tracked and evaluated, not for recruitment, but for compatibility with a private program codenamed Silhouette, an elite network of operatives who served as both protectors and enforcers for the Empire. Victor had been building. May had ranked higher than any subject ever recorded. She had become their prime candidate. The crash had been orchestrated not just to test her instincts, but to forge a connection. They knew someone like her wouldn't ignore a dying man. They knew she would act. The plan had worked, but it hadn't ended where it was supposed to. She was supposed to be recruited, convinced, reshaped. But she had started asking questions. She had started digging. Dr. Yuan's voice remained flat as he explained the consequences. Those who dug too deep were removed. The man in the video, he had been a former analyst who tried to leak classified data. He had been caught, silenced, and erased. May stood still, her breathing shallow. She understood what was happening now. The mansion wasn't just a home, it was a factory of manipulation, surveillance, and fear. Then Dr. Yuan delivered the final blow. Victor planned to marry her. It wasn't about love. It was about control. A public marriage would make her legally bound to him. A symbolic union to show that someone like May, strong, disciplined, incorruptible, could be claimed by Victor Shen. It would legitimize the program, give it a face. And anyone who opposed it would be reminded that even the strongest could be owned. May said nothing. Her silence masked the storm building inside her. She was escorted back to her room, where she found a white dress waiting for her, hanging by the window like a ghost. That night, she didn't sleep. She paced her room in silence, her mind tracing every possible escape route. They had taken her freedom. Now they wanted her identity, her autonomy, her face. But what they didn't understand, what they couldn't calculate, was her will. May wasn't going to run. She was going to end it. Asterisk. The sun rose over the Shen estate with a deceptive calm, casting soft golden light through the glass walls. Inside, preparations were underway for a private ceremony. Staff moved in silence, arranging white flowers and setting a long table with polished silverware. In the grand hall, a white arch had been constructed overnight, adorned with roses and velvet ribbons. It looked like a wedding from a fairy tale. But to Mei Lin, it was a final warning, one last attempt to make her disappear into a carefully constructed lie. She had been dressed by attendants in the early morning hours. The white gown fit perfectly, as if it had been tailored long before she ever arrived. Her hair was pinned up, her face untouched by makeup, her expression unreadable. No one spoke to her. No one needed to. The ceremony was not about celebration. It was about submission. Victor waited at the front of the hall, standing tall despite the bandages that still wrapped his side. His eyes never left her as she was led forward, step by step, across the polished floor. He smiled softly, as if this was all natural, all deserved. May felt the weight of the stares from the silent guests, hand-picked executives, bodyguards, and a few government contacts who had been drawn into Victor's growing shadow network. At the far end of the hall, standing between them, was a priest. But something was wrong. His eyes darted around, nervous. His hands trembled. And behind the white curtains, barely visible, was a figure bound to a chair. The real priest, gagged, tied, hidden just enough to be missed by a casual glance. This was no wedding. It was a performance. And May was the centerpiece. As Victor reached for her hand, she made her move. From beneath her sleeve, she retrieved the thin poison needle she had stolen days earlier from the lab in the West Wing. It had been hidden in her hair clip ever since. As Victor stepped closer, preparing to slide a ring onto her finger, she let the needle fall into her palm and struck him cleanly in the side of his neck, quick, precise, invisible to most. He blinked, stumbled, His smile faltered. Within seconds, his knees buckled. Gasps echoed through the hall. Guards reached for weapons, but it was already too late. May turned, grabbing the microphone from the officiant's podium and switching it to the estate's internal broadcast system. With practiced calm, she began uploading the footage she had recovered, the files from the stolen phone, the video of the bound man, the surveillance evidence stored in the West Wing servers. The signal spread through Victor's own security network, broadcasting to every screen on the estate. In less than 2 minutes, everything Victor had built began to unravel. Chaos erupted. Guests tried to flee. Guards scrambled to shut down the transmission. But May had already wired the files to external sources' anonymous servers, media contacts, international watchdogs. There was no stopping it. The truth was out. Shentek's darkest secrets, the surveillance experiments, the disappearances, it was all exposed. Victor collapsed on the marble floor, struggling for breath. The poison was silent and efficient. Just like May. By the time police arrived, May was gone. Authorities swarmed the estate, recovering evidence, detaining staff, and launching investigations that would ripple through the corporate world for years. Shentek's stock collapsed. Government launched inquiries. The mansion was sealed off, its halls empty once again. As for Mei Lin, no one could find her. Some said she escaped the country. Others believed she vanished into the forest she once trained in, continuing her discipline in silence. But every so often, stories would surface of a woman teaching young girls to defend themselves, of a shadow moving through cities with quiet purpose. She had walked into a trap. She had been watched, manipulated, and nearly erased. But in the end, the KungFu girl didn't just survive. She burned the empire to the ground.